I'd like to pretend that it was some kind of genius plan.
You were
So I
having coffee by a river and the
yeah,
sunlight was coming down and the birds as the birds settled, you thought, "Ah."
I'm gonna just do a CV writing service. Honestly, anybody listening, this is the worst business model in the world. And so I kind of like had this session with stripping out everything that was gonna get in the way of that piece of creative work.
Oh, so fast. I bet if you and I sat here for about 6 hours, we could fire up a company. Hello. Is it me you're looking for?
Hello. Sorry, sir. I was just caught having to look after the cat.
Oh, good. How you doing?
Yeah, good, thank you. How are you doing, man?
Good, 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 good. How's the day? How's
Yeah,
all the holiday festivities and everything going?
day's great. Yeah, I caught up with family. We went for a walk. Actually, caught up with both my girlfriend's parents and our parents. We had a big meal together, and we got the check. So it was nice just to bring everyone together, and
Nice.
yeah, a good 3 hour conversation. It's one of those things you think is going to be like an hour, and then suddenly everyone gets chatting, and it's like Thanksgiving.
Oh, and then you're just in it, and time just sort of like expands, and you're
Yeah.
just like in that flow. I love that. What'd you have?
It's really good. So we went out to this little tiny restaurant just by the side of the river, and it's got this amazing platter of fish. So went for fish mostly. My sister is a vegetarian, so we're trying to cater for that as well. Yeah, it was nice. It's nice. And tell me about yourself.
Nice.
How was your day?
It was good. It was good. I think it was nice that we were here, sort of, in the house. We haven't really done Christmas in our house proper. We usually were either like at my mom's house or we were at my in-laws who are here right now, in their house in Sacramento. And so it was our first sort of like, and our youngest is now 4. So really in that, like, I get it. I get all the things. I get the ceremony. I get what we're doing. And, but it was nice just to kind of be here and settled, especially after, a year of traveling and being on the road and doing San Fran and New York and all those sort of things. It was nice just to kind of be settled, and it was good. And then Christmas Day, about halfway through Christmas Day, I went like, "Ooh, I'm like, I'm not feeling it." And then I was out for like 24 hours, and then my son was also out, and he was like throwing up and stuff. And so all of a sudden, both of us were just like out, and so we all of a sudden we went from excited Christmas to like we all just sort of collapsed it into like nap and nurture mode, and now we're all sort of like back up and out it. So so it's been an interesting turn of events this week so far.
I am sorry to hear that you fell sick, man. That's always the worst timing when it happens over these holiday periods. And, you know,
If
if
you're
you've got a
gonna
family,
do it though, you might as well do it when everyone's around and can support and like you're together and like, whatever, versus like being in the daily rhythm when things are moving and popping and shaking. And so it was all right though. It's been
okay,
good though.
it's and
Um
thanks for the friends, man. I hope you're feeling better.
well, I appreciate it. Yeah, I'm excited to talk to you. It's so funny. I just used workflow in an instance where our CTO Martina is working on a side project, and she had slacked me a link and was like, "Can you just give me some feedback on this?" And I was like, "Yes, and I'm gonna tell you how I'm gonna do it." And
Amazing.
so I threw it into the platform, and we're gonna start working on it through the platform. So I love it. I'm excited to dig into to all the things and kind of hear all the stories. And I didn't know you. I think I just saw. You raised a seed recently, right?
Yeah, we just closed our pre-seed even. It's one of the largest in London for a while, for our type of company. $3 million has got us off to the races, and yeah, we're
Oh
official
my
now.
gosh.
Yeah.
That is amazing. So I want to hear how we get to this point, but like I want to go back to um I saw physics. Is that right? Is
Yeah.
that
Yeah, that's right.
that's how we get here, is physics?
You know what? It almost, like, traces back a little bit earlier. When I was growing up, I was always, when I was growing up, I was in this very creative family where my dad is a set designer for the theater, my mum is a director for the theater, my sister actually went and studied fine art, and it's just this very creative family. And
Yeah.
so I kind of wanted to put my own stamp on that. Um, when I was a teenager, I spent a lot of time making different video games and particularly making the maps for video games. So it was this kind
Yep.
of like digital art in a way, where you're painting the scenery and you're trying to think about what looks natural, what looks good. And
Or as natural as it can when you're dealing with, like, the 8-bit renders of Doom.
yeah,
Like,
exactly.
the difference between stone and grass, and you're like, "Okay, visually, I can sort of tell one's green and one's brown," but,
Exactly. Yeah.
what were your, like, top 2 games that you were into making maps for?
So we took a Command and Conquer game that was based in the desert, Command and Conquer Generals, for those that have played that version of it, and we turned it into a Vietnam recreation.
Oh,
And
wow.
yeah, and I really got into that. I think I made maybe 40 maps. Each one of them would have taken 50 to 60 hours, and I went down to Vietnam
Amazing.
to even like do a recce and understand what is this world really like. So I'm really invested in trying to understand it and recreate it as much as you can with the limited tools you have. So I've
Yeah.
always come from a creative place of wanting to make things, wanting to build things. Um, I've always had this kind of curiosity for how the world works and how things can connect together. And being a bit of a systems thinker, that kind of took me down this path towards physics, where you're sort of
Mhm.
starting to understand how things relate to each other, how does the world work at a very large scale, at a very small scale, and everything in between. And that just always fascinated me. So massively enjoyed that. The one thing that I wanted to do though is do things that were creative and going to make an impact today. And I always found that academia was just always making things that are going to basically help the world in 200 years or 500 years or
Mhm.
who knows. And it's a little bit too detached. And so I think entrepreneurship is that real opportunity for you to actually connect to make an impact today in a really, really big way. And so after finishing the physics course, I was quickly trying to apply kind of systems thinking of how do things relate to each other to the world through entrepreneurship, through building startups. And while all of my other friends from university went and got serious jobs and started making actual money, I decided to throw caution to the wind, uh, just go out at it on my own and see if I can get a startup together.
I love that. And so, yeah, making not serious money and not having a serious job. What was the thing that made you sort of like take that left turn or sort of go against the grain and what I imagine is usually pressure for, I mean, even when you're a junior and you're sort of like, you're starting to talk to big companies and you're getting internships set up and like there's this like I feel like there's it's changing now, but I feel like there's always been this coming out of the 80s and the 90s, this sort of steamroll towards like, God, get done with school and just get in and get the best, most prestigious or the biggest sort of salary you can get and then just keep plowing through. Like what made you sort of, divert a bit from that?
Yeah, I think there's a huge amount of pressure and expectation that people come out of the education system with in terms of you have to simply keep climbing the ladder and you have to get that next run right now, otherwise you're kind of failing. And nowhere is that more seen than at Oxford, where I was, where people honestly tie themselves in knots worrying if they're good enough after they graduate. And what you see from a lot of people is they go for like these management career paths in very large companies because that's where the salaries are the highest. And
Mhm.
that's kind of got the most prestige in terms of brand of company. And, you've got this amazing CV that allows you to get there. So of course you should go and do that. Um, I just remember like a couple of years ago, I was going on the YC co-founder matching platform. and I was scanning through all these different types of people, and you had some people who had gone off and built some kind of crazy technology, and some people who had kind of been pounding the pavement doing sales, and they sort of started to build businesses. And you had these other people who came out of very prestigious universities, and they'd all gone down this much less interesting management track because they've kind of been forced to do so. And they've got
Mhm.
these management skills which are so valuable, and they're always very bright. What they haven't got from that is this uh, real world experience building companies because they've never
Yep.
taken that risk. And I think that stems from this kind of pressure that's put on people to just be climbing the next rung of the ladder in a very safe way. So I've seen it. I've seen it happen to a few friends. For some reason, um, you know what happened? Uh, I got an internship in a big company, and I saw what it was looking like. And people there had no passion or motivation. And then anytime I think like entrepreneurship's hard, I always think back on that and think, wow, I mean, the alternative of spending 50 years there.
Totally. What time is it? How many more hours until I leave? Or
Yeah,
like, let's see. So I've only got 3 months. So if I can just put in a good push for 3 months, then maybe I can ask for a raise. And then maybe like, and that sort of like
yeah,
cycle
exactly.
just
Did I make
keeps
my
going.
billable
And
hours?
I totally agree. It's funny. I just had a conversation on a previous podcast where we were talking on an episode where we were talking about the same thing that I remember interviewing. I started the interactive division at an agency back in 2005, and I had interviewed someone for a project management role, and they wanted it. They were asking for a fairly decent salary, but it's because they had come um, out of a university here with an MBA, or
Yeah.
2 MBAs. Like it was stacked. But I remember even in that conversation, the whole time sort of listening to all of the accomplishments that this person had acquired in school, thinking, but you've never had to deal with Home Depot or Sprint or AT&T and T, and like and all of the stuff that goes with that, and like
Yep.
navigating the sort of and the contracts and the sort of you've got the one stakeholder that's just a pain in the ass. Like all the things that you
Yep.
haven't like touched yet. So sorry, your like multiple degrees aren't that like worth that much to me.
Yep.
Um
Yeah.
and thinking that, even early on in my career, that it really just comes down to that, like, tenaciousness of being able to sort of figure it out and put as much real world experience as you can under your belt.
Yeah.
So totally agree.
It's not easy because I think, in today's society, people need to build their own safety net. And so I can't pretend to say that everybody should just go out there and quit their jobs. I know how hard that is. But as you say, in terms of like building real world experience, there's nothing quite like being the last line of defense, making this decision before stuff goes wrong. Like
Yeah.
until you've really been there, you can't put into words like how that changes you as a decision maker.
Totally. But I think I even and maybe it really helped that I did this when I was in my 20s, but I one of my first jobs, I was making commission hand over fist, but I quit because, just the management and the company didn't suit me, and I didn't know what I was gonna do next, but I was fine that I was gonna figure it out. But I
Mm.
think one of the things I also learned early on is, no, people can't just quit their jobs, but now is the best time in
Yeah.
the world to be able to learn stuff on the side for free, and, like, building websites or launching things for people, doing social media consulting. Like there's stuff that you can do for free that doesn't cost you anything. That there's so many free tools that I sort of did that early on as I learned how to build websites. And I always had this like, as soon as I knew how to do that, I always had this safety net that I could always tell a company to just like piss off and like and I could leave, and I knew that within a week or two I could start making 1,000 or $2,000. Like I could start sort of making some money to have some come in to sort of expand that time and not be
Yes.
like I got to find something, and whatever the next thing is that seems halfway decent, I'll just take it because I gotta get back to that safety net place, that it was nice to be
Yeah.
able to sort of always roll into something, and I think now's the time that anyone can do that while you're at any job, is just to be able to, like, find and gather some extra skills, charge 40 bucks, like, literally, just make it up. $45. Like, this is what I charge, and then just start like doing it. And then once
Yeah.
you've done it a couple of times, well, now you're 50 an hour and just like
Yeah.
start doing it. And then you'll always have this thing that you never sort of get trapped in that place where you're like, I can't leave, I can't change, I can't do anything because I'm just like set here. So,
I
um,
went through the exact same path, Kyle, and that way you put it, where you build up your own safety net in terms of your skills, like marketable skills, where you know whatever happens, I can now do this thing. I am covered. There is a market of opportunity out there to pick this up. It just allows you to, because you've kind of capped your downside. Suddenly, you can start thinking, okay, what do I really do with my time now? Now that I've kind of freed that up.
yeah, totally. So I love so you took this sort of left turn while everyone else is going down the career path, and you set your sights on entrepreneurship. What was your like, okay, this is what I'm gonna do, or what was the spark to that sort of led you into the first venture?
So I'd like to pretend that it was some kind of genius plan.
You were
So
having coffee by a river and the
yeah,
sunlight was coming down and the birds as the birds settled, you thought, "Ah."
exactly.
Like that.
Ray of sunshine.
Exactly.
I I actually remember I was helping a lot of my friends by writing their resumes because everyone else has
Mhm.
graduated. And I've graduated. I'm now doing some boring corporate job, and I realized that I really enjoyed helping people in this way more than what I was doing punching numbers into a spreadsheet. And weirdly, by following that kind of desire for service, I was like, well, if I'm doing this for free for a bunch of people, maybe I could at least get paid for this. That could be a
Mhm.
business. And so it started out being, as you say, a side hustle of I'm going to just do a CV writing service for people. Now, honestly, anybody listening, this is the worst business model in the world. There is no repeat business. If you've done a great job, they can use that resume for the next 10 years. Uh,
Right.
um,
You're
it's
working yourself
these
out of a job.
Yeah, you really are, you really
That's
are, and it's
funny.
very service intensive. It's very hard to maintain quality control and, like, scale up a team. So I ended up, getting to a point where I had 5 writers who were writing CVs for me, and that was already quite hard to manage because you're trying to, like
Now while you still had the daytime job?
so I did something a little bit
Or did
extreme.
you make a
I
pivot?
I actually quit the daytime job before going into this, and
Oh,
what I was
nice.
doing
Okay.
to pay my rent was, I was then tutoring kids on the side, and so I was going around London on my bike, turning up at, very wealthy people's houses and teaching their kids for, um, you know, a good amount per hour, but, it's a lot of work to get all the hours you need. So I was basically doing
Yeah.
that part-time, and then I was building this CV writing business, resume writing business, the other half of the time. And that's where I was starting to learn, like, how to become an entrepreneur. Here's how you manage your time and you prioritize, and here's how you deal with people and all this stuff. That's kind of the,
Mhm.
ground for me. So while I'm building this company, um I realized this is never gonna scale and become like a gigantic company. And it was a labor of love, and I think one thing that came out of it, and this is something you'll always get whenever you do something entrepreneurial, is you come out of these, like, amazing skills you never expected to have. Like,
Yep.
suddenly, you're quite good at nonfiction writing, and you're quite good at, like, summarizing things for investors because you've done it, like, a bunch of times.
Totally. I tell you one that was funny for me is I worked on the Game Awards, for a couple of years,
Yeah.
and there were so many assets that had to be sort of done across, like, all these games and all these people and developers and designers. that I got so good at this like Photoshop, like pulling something in and editing and like doing the shortcuts and like pushing it out. Like there are these little things that like during some early jobs that like you get so good at, and now like you come out going, oh my gosh, now my ability to like fly through like design tasks and things like that are great. Things you would never like think ahead of time that you would
I know.
acquire.
Yeah, it's brilliant. It's like suddenly you've got all these like weird little superpowers that you've like really invested in. Um, so
Totally.
yeah, I basically decided to round that off and go into tech.
Nice.
So when I'm sort of learning how to do a business and do this properly, I was following all sorts of different sources online. And this is one of the other things that's great about when you just start going down this road and committing yourself to it, is that suddenly you're picking up all this new information. Like your brain is like suddenly alert to everything that's around you that could be like possibly helpful for this very, very difficult task you've
Well,
got
and
in front of
interesting that your first venture also, while you wouldn't consider it a commercial success, it's one of those that it did two things. You picked up skills. Well, three things. You picked up skills. You became finely attuned and aware now of what was going to sort of get you to a place where you would get financially successful. And then I would say the third is also I sort of equate it to taking the shrink wrap like, off, like, a new product where you've
you.
sort of
Yeah.
like, you've broken that seal, and now you're just, like, in entrepreneurial mode in V2, which you operate differently in that mode on your second time around.
Yeah, big time. I think a lot of people put pressure on themselves to deliver the billion-dollar company the first time they have a hack at it. And, what you see actually is almost the opposite. It's the kids who got started when they were 16 mowing lawns who actually become really powerful, strong entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
And, so I think if you see entrepreneurship overall as more like, "Hey, this is gonna be a 10-year journey, and you're gonna go at this particular idea for a bit, but not feel emotionally tied to that one thing." It's like a healthier way to just be able to move forward, and it definitely allows you just to
Totally.
so yeah, I basically one of the sources that was like coming in, I realized that I really loved everything that YC was putting out. Y Combinator, the um, investment community based out of Silicon Valley. They had this whole series of lectures they called Startup School. And this is like pretty classic material that I would strongly recommend anybody who's thinking about entrepreneurship go and explore, where you have these 21-hour lectures, which I know sounds like a lot, but they're on specific topics. So you can just cherry pick the ones that are relevant. And they're given by like Mark Zuckerberg and like Reid Hoffman, who founded LinkedIn, and all of these like giants, like the guy who founded Twitch, like all of these people who are like
Mhm.
icons now, were giving you for free because you can just watch it, this like lecture course on how to build a tech startup. And I just saw, having struggled with scaling and making an impact through that with my previous venture, this would actually be like a really good playbook to follow. And so I became quite a student of the lean startup method, where you go out and validate hypotheses rather than just trying to like charge us money for a product. You actually really think about it more systematically. And I really loved everything that's Silicon Valley was putting out in terms of this is how you can build a company and make a huge impact by building something that's scalable and that can be backed by investors. And so the next period of my life was really having a go at building those kind of companies. So I knew absolutely nothing at all going into that. I really want to emphasize
Amazing. Yeah.
that I
Well,
was
and the
starting.
naivete, I think sometimes is one of those things that gives you I think it was Orson Welles who was asked about that when he directed for the first time. They were like, "How did you do all these things that no one has done before?" And he's like, "I didn't know you couldn't do them."
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
it's my
exactly.
first time.
Totally. Yeah. I think I heard a similar line from a YC person saying, the best companies are these recent grads who don't know how long things are meant to take. So they think something that like most people would say would take like 4 weeks takes like an afternoon, and they kind of get it done in 2 days. And they're like, well, I kind of get it done. And they're like, amazing. You just got all your branding and website set up in 2 days. That's fine.
Totally. Yeah,
Not knowing
exactly.
is an advantage sometimes. And so for me, building a tech company, that was learning how to build the technology because I had no money. I had no way to like do it. I didn't feel like I was backable at that point, to be quite honest. So I felt like the best thing I could do is simply get this business up and running as far as I can myself, and also learning more properly, really, how to do a bit more marketing, a bit more sales, which I'd done a little bit of in the previous company, but not really. And so, um, looking at the kinds of companies that are coming out of Silicon Valley at the time, you had Uber, Airbnb, these gigantic marketplace style business models. And I really wanted to get good at doing that. And so I was looking at
Mhm.
other opportunities to build marketplaces and what are the dynamics of a good marketplace? Like you need kind of like a high volume of transactions so that it's worth both sides sticking with the marketplace instead of like getting off marketplace. You need ideally things to be relatively sort of like, at least on one of the sides of it, things to be sort of commoditized so that it's worth it for users to choose between different options. So you have these different like flavors of what makes a good marketplace. I was hunting around, and where I landed was on-demand dry cleaning. So I often joke that this is because I've just been a student and like the only two problems you have as a student are like where to eat and cleaning your clothes.
Totally, gotta clean my clothes.
Exactly. And maybe there was a part of me that just lazily didn't want to do this again. So I was going to just build a whole startup around it. But
Nice.
the truth was it had some like interesting dynamics, which is this like very repeatable problem, which people hate. And there's real pain there, like, and it's pretty universal. And
Yep.
all these like suppliers, but they're basically indistinguishable. So you don't really mind who you go to. You probably just want someone who's low cost and available. And on the consumer side, they probably it look like like be willing to pay a premium to be able to get this just handled for them. I
Yeah.
also did some research, and there was like a company in the States called Washio that just started up and was like pushing this model forwards. And this hadn't really arrived in the UK. So for me, there was like a lot of ticks that this is worth exploring. And
Nice.
so, yeah, shut down the CV writing company and decided just to start building this. And I can kind of take you through, if you want, how I approach that.
I would love to know, yeah, the first week and how you thought about logistics just in terms of, I mean, immediately I got this vision in my mind of you basically picking up your neighbor's basket and bringing it back to your house and, like, putting it all in your wash. Like how did what is your okay, so you saw this, it ticked all the boxes and you saw that it was
Mhm.
being done somewhere else and that there's a good chance that this is something that you could scale. But what
Mhm.
did, like, week 1 look like when you sort of set your mind to it?
So I mentioned the lean startup methodology just a few minutes ago. And the big idea there is that you don't just try and like build the whole business on day one and just like grind
Mhm.
out this platform and then do a big launch after 6 months. The whole philosophy is to minimize the amount of waste where you've made a mistake and you've gone in the wrong direction. You try and identify which parts of your business model are kind of the flimsiest, weakest hypotheses, and you then go and validate if those are true or if they're false straight away. So the way I started this was trying to see would suppliers actually be willing to jump onto this platform and use this platform. Um, I figured that the demand side, the consumers, would be a little bit more validated just because I'd been the consumer. I just didn't know
Yeah.
anything about the other side. So what I did is I took this screenshot of you have like Grubhub in the States, or you
Mhm.
have like
Yeah.
so there's one in the UK called Just Eat. It's the same kind of thing where you order your takeaways. I got a screenshot of the Just Eat homepage, which has all these different takeaways. And then I mocked up over the logo of Just Eat, like a different logo, our logo. And I switched
Yep.
out all pictures of food for shirts and ties and things. I took this printed out down to basically like the posh area of London where there's tons of dry cleaners. I just went door to door
Mhm.
saying, "Hey, we have this new platform that's gonna be coming out. Would you like to sign up? Your business will show up in these listings so that when people, book in their dry cleaning, it comes to you and you get an order."
Yeah.
And so I just went without having anything else. Like there was nothing.
I
There was no
love
launch.
that. I can because I can visualize in my mind, you've got a clipboard and essentially what is a Canva mock-up of a
Yeah,
screenshot that has been altered a little bit, and you're saying, "We have this platform that's gonna be coming out." Like, that one little line right there is the best because uh, that sort of you do need that, like, you gotta get past that idea that I don't have anything and I haven't built anything, I don't even know any developers, I don't know any designers, like, all these things I think that hang people up, whereas literally you can just have a piece of paper and a picture on it and say, "I have this thing coming soon, would you use
yeah,
it?" That's okay. Like, do that.
totally,
I love that.
totally. Yeah, honestly, and this, I could have spent a year learning to code and building it, and I think a lot of people fall into that trap. I think if you go and validate and actually speak to customers for a bit first, it's really, really helpful. Because, for all I knew, everybody could have said, "No, this isn't gonna fit for us," and then I do something completely different, and it needs a whole different skill set, and there's no point in me having learned everything. So, I did
Mhm.
that. I signed up 20 different dry cleaners over the course of maybe a couple of weeks, maybe 2 weeks,
Nice.
3 weeks. So, I mean, you'd expect it's a pretty much a no-brainer for them. They get new business. Great. Um, then I felt still quite confident on the demand side. What I then went and did is I decided I need to see if I can actually build this thing and just get a prototype into people's hands and watch them use this.
Yep.
So to do this, I'll give the caveat that, in my physics degree, we'd done a little bit of programming, but it was mostly very physicsy, hardcore programming languages that you won't really use on the web. So I'm
Right.
not saying I was a complete beginner to the idea of what like a variable was or something like that. I kind of knew the gist of programming, but I didn't know any of the modern web technologies. And
Yeah.
I kind of went into a bit of a grind mode or over maybe about 6 weeks, I believe, where I built out a mobile app for consumers, which is just a website, so it's not trying to build like all singing, all dancing app where you could book in, I want these items, and I'm gonna basically click them, I'm gonna put in a date, I'm gonna like organize it, and then I'm gonna go and book that in and pay for it. And in terms of
So was it essentially you did kind of an HTML form type format, right? Where it was
yeah.
just it was more sort of check boxes and I was sort of selecting and I'm inputting some information to you to send.
Yeah, and you know what I will say? What I would do now, doing the same thing, is I'll do something that's very much simpler than that, where you could use a type form or you could use a Google form. I think
Typeform or Airtable or also
yes.
Zapier has a great front end that
Yeah.
basically you have a form and then it goes and triggers all the other actions afterwards. That there's so many low cost options like that to basically do it for nothing.
Totally.
Excuse me, one alternative to Typeform that I love is Fill Out,
Or
that for free, because Typeform sometimes is like 40 to 90 to $100 or whatever it is, but Fill Out is great. You basically fill out a form and it's got that multi-step process and it
yep.
links into like a Google Sheet or whatever, and now you have your intake form that goes to a spreadsheet.
Yes.
Nothing, doesn't cost you anything.
Yeah.
That's
Totally.
you're right, that would be such a good, easy, prototypey way that you could do it and basically tie that form could be tied kind of just to a domain name that looked good on mobile.
Yes.
All
Absolutely.
done.
Absolutely. It would be done, and it would look pretty crisp if you use something like
Mhm.
that, rather than you having to learn UX design and so on.
Totally.
So I think this is what like a bit of a blunder, but I decided I was going to build it myself. To be fair, a lot of those tools weren't like as accessible back then, and I also had this idea in my head that we need to have a bit of a brand around it for the consumer side so people trust it. And I actually think that's not necessary. I honestly think if you have a good deal, if you are good value, you will get an initial batch of customers. You won't get
Mhm.
every customer. There'll always be the naysayers who say, "Who's this company? I don't know them. I don't trust them." And trust me, you spending like 5 grand on a domain name is not going to change those people.
Totally. Yeah,
So
yeah.
don't worry about those people. Just if you have a good deal, then you don't need to think about branding too much, to be
Yep.
honest. But anyway, I went to start building this thing, and what I did that I think was really good, because this was kind of the start of me getting into design, is when I built a version of this, I went out into the street where I knew buyers would be. So I went down on people's cigarette breaks and at lunch breaks down to where the banks were, all these like white collar workers coming out into the street. I put the
Yep.
phone in their hands and I said, "Hey, like this is a bit crazy, but I just want you to test this app I'm building. Can you see if you can order?" And just watched if they could use it and like what their questions were, like where were they getting concerned, what were they a bit nervous about. A lot of things in e-commerce are about like how do you reduce the risk and increase
Hmm.
like value. And what I learned through that is I absolutely sucked at design.
Which is
Yeah,
amazing because that's the place that you wanna be. I think a lot of people also get hung up that they're just gonna assume that they're gonna be bad at design, so you don't start. But I love that you basically you built something, anything, and you put it in people's hands and you got the feedback and then you went, "Great." Then the second that you went home, you were gonna be better at design. Like, you were gonna every time that you did that, you got better and better and better. I love
absolutely, and
that.
it would literally be that. I'd be out there at lunch, getting the feedback. In the evening, I'm building the next version. I'm out there the next day with a completely different app, and then just, like, going through that loop until we had something that people could, like, pretty seamlessly use. Um, I
Nice.
think, like, those are the reps that I wish every designer could go through. I think
Yep.
if you only ever design for clients and you have maybe like 2 occasions to present work to them, and a lot of it has been kind of
Right.
like popped up by, other people in your team, you're not gonna see the suffering where a user just doesn't understand how to click
Right.
through what.
Or you design for the design community, and
Yeah,
aesthetically
yeah,
it looks pleasing, but, like, that's
totally.
totally
Yeah,
different than
I do agree.
what I think about when I go to an ATM and, like, how things like that from a human computer interaction perspective is that there are these things that have had to be made as dummy proof as possible, and sort of taking it from that perspective.
Yeah, yeah, this was good for learning how to design for the general market, but I was never gonna end up being, like, good as a like, actually good, like, someone who
Mhm.
could build something for the design community through that process, but it was helpful, and, what we ended up with was basically, I have this front end now. People can click through, and they can put in a request, and they can book it in. So that process, yeah, I'd like to say it took me, that 6 weeks, of me grinding and building. uh, I mean, realistically, probably after a few iterations of that and trying to like make things work, that could maybe be like 3, 4 months. And off the back of that, decided to launch. And to launch, I need to get this in front of consumers. And so I printed out a lot of leaflets and I went round and I was handing those out on the street. I was putting them through people's doors in the areas of London where there were people had money, and I thought they'd be like suitable for this, and just waiting by my mobile phone to see if people call the number and they book in and they start using it. And
And wait, are you still tutoring at this time?
yeah, so I'm still tutoring. I'm still
Okay.
yeah, trying to make it work for that. So what happened was it was pretty quiet. It was pretty quiet. And I didn't get a huge number of calls. We got a couple, and then it's like, "Oh, you wanna clean that? We actually can't support that." "Oh, you're in the wrong part of London."
Right.
So, and I'm
We
just
don't
like,
take mink coats, sorry, like
"Yeah." Exactly. And then, we did get a few through, that we got the business started, people are starting to use it a little bit, and the product was kind of working. But there was this problem, we just didn't have the volume. And
Thank
this is this classic thing with marketplaces that once you get things started, firstly, your value proposition isn't great at the start because you don't have a huge range of suppliers. And you don't have a huge range of buyers to offer to these suppliers. So my suppliers are calling me up saying like, "Where are the orders?" And this is kind of called the cold start problem in marketplaces, where you basically
Mhm.
as big as you can early to make it more valuable. So that was a bit of a problem. And the other thing is, in any marketplace, you want to be balancing cost per acquisition versus the lifetime value. So if you haven't heard of these jargon terms, cost per acquisition, what is the total amount of money you've spent, including your own labor, in my case, handing out stuff door to door to be able to get someone on board. You can do the maths and figure out a number for that. And then you can work out what is your margin times how long you think they'll keep using the platform to work out the lifetime value. And you really need to get paid back. If you're bootstrapping, it needs to be pretty quick. So what I was doing myself, um, I was gonna, run through all my money, which was basically nothing, pretty quick unless it took off.
Yeah.
Um, I tried a bit more on the paid side. I tried a few cross promotions with other organizations. So I started exploring different marketing channels. Um, but it became pretty clear that this was not going to be as successful and bigger company as I was initially expecting. And then while I'm sort of like working through the motions here, Washio, this US based company that is like doing the same model, folds, no pun intended. They
Yeah.
the company goes
Nice.
under. Sorry. And, I apologize. Uh, yeah, so it wasn't working there. I was speaking to our, like, customers and, like, people who would be prospective customers about it, and it turns out the dynamics are pretty interesting about the buyer behavior, where essentially if you are somebody who might use this and has a discretionary income, either a lot of it, unfortunately, is men who have a wife who is stay at home. I don't know why it's that gender dynamic. There's probably the switcheroo in other people's lives, but it was often that way round. And so those people did not want the service because they had it done at home. You had a lot of people who, in Britain in particular, didn't really value their time, and so they're happy
Mm.
to do it. You had also a lot of supply in a really convenient place compared to being at home to hand over your cleaning and being at
Right.
home, pick it up again. Whereas you could actually go on the train and see like a dry cleaner right by your train station and do it
Right.
on your terms. So like a lot of the demand was actually being satisfied by these other methods, which
Mm.
starts out the woodwork. Now, this wasn't like a huge, huge time commitment for me to like figure these things out, but it was a bit disappointing because you realize the market size, which you think is like scalable, everyone's going to use it, is well, actually, it's only the people who are earning over 100K, and
Right.
then only the people who don't live near a train station. And you
There's a
realize,
I would say there's one other piece to it that I've used services like this, and there's one other piece to it that I think comes into it, which is a little subconscious, but and it's hard to quantify sometimes, but it's like, there's preferences, right?
"Hmm,
Between sort of like, I have my sort of like everyday t-shirts, which doesn't really
yeah,
matter. It could be warm, warm and warm. And then I
yeah,
have like stuff I have from Hugo Boss where I'm like, okay, here's the deal. Okay, let me just write down. Okay, so here's how we're gonna do it. You're gonna do tap cold, but then you're gonna hang dry. But this other one that looks similar, that one can go in at low. Like there's like sometimes there's these like things that make it hard. That sometimes you also worry. I think on your nice stuff sometimes that like people won't read the label, right,
yes,
or whatever, and you're like,
yes."
So there's sometimes that friction.
I mean, the thing I would say that is good in hindsight of the approach I took is it took me 6 months to realize all these dynamics about the business, and I have spoken
Mm,
to hundreds of people in that time. And what I think a lot of people do is they invest 3 years in a project like that, or they,
yep.
raise immediately and suddenly you discover it's that, but you have to kinda keep doing it for 2 years. It's a lot of your entrepreneurial life doing it. And so there's a lot to be said for just being scrappy and getting kinda stuck in,
Mhm.
realizing all these things, and then just being able to move on. And so what I did is I ended up selling the technology that I'd built to the biggest dry cleaner, of my suppliers because they wanted it for their order management. And then I had a whole bunch of data about the dry cleaners, which I then used to jump into my next startup. And I'd kind of got moving. And it cost me 6 months, were quite a fun 6 months where I picked up a lot of like learning. Yeah,
Yep.
I it was okay. That's a bet I'll take. So
That's so great. And now you're stacking that learning on the first learning. And so now you've got two companies worth of learnings to take into the next venture.
totally. I mean, I think in that second venture, I did about 6 months worth of work in terms of what took in the first venture in about 2 weeks. And then the third venture, I'm getting it done in like a couple of days. Like you really start to speed up.
Oh, so fast. I bet if you and I sat here for about 6 hours, we could fire up a company. You know what I mean?
For
Like
sure.
you
For sure.
get really good at those processes and know how to like sort of connect those dots and pull people together and sort of get something going. So it gets much faster, which is awesome.
It's a skill set. Yeah. And so I talked a little bit about like what next. And what I saw is that the dry cleaners all had this big problem, which is that when an order comes in and their driver isn't available, then the owner of that store, who's like meant to be running a business, has to hop in the back of their car. They're sticking the shirts on the back seat. They're driving
Yeah.
down. Like those owners hated that. Can you picture like thinking you own your own business and you're now climbing into the back of your car to like pick up
Right.
shit?
And someone's yelling at you on the other end when you get there and you're like, "Why
Oh,
did I do that?" You know? Yeah,
what is
totally.
going on? This driver. So, and this is a really common thing as well that you see with entrepreneurs, which is like the first few ideas you do, they're sort of obvious ones. They're ones that maybe you felt. And then by being in the game, so by being in the market, you start to uncover things that nobody else is really thinking about. And so at this point, it became obvious that actually finding drivers in London is really, really difficult.
Hmm.
And London has the most amazing food scene you would ever imagine. Like, you can literally eat from any country in the world. I mean, I think there's actually like a restaurant for every single country in the world, maybe barring Antarctica. So we've got all of these deliveries needed to do for that. E-commerce is huge. Everyone's ordering things online. You've got all these other like on-demand services like Uber, which has us on-demand drop off for things. Now
Mhm.
they're all spinning up. Everyone's competing for the drivers. And so I took this view of like, maybe we can get in there and provide a platform to connect all of these employers of drivers with the drivers themselves.
Nice.
So, if you picture kind of Postmates or Grubhub or one of these, they have like an operations layer that does that all for them. That's great if you're a big company that can afford to like build all that tech. If you're like a takeaway, you have no access to that. Your like logistics layer is your contact book in your phone. So the vast majority of companies don't have access to this. And so I'm off to the races again. I'm spinning up the MVP, like the draft. I'm going around to the companies straight down Kingsland Road, which has like about 50 different takeaways on it, signing
And
everyone up.
twice as fast now, like, in
Yeah,
terms of spinning up, asking what I'm asking, how I'm asking, right?
exactly. Everyone sign up, spreadsheet, the works. Don't have to do everything on like build my own app, anything like that. It's just people text me when they need a driver. I call the driver. That's how it gets validated. And
Nice.
so right at the start, it's simply running this tiny little operation to try and connect all of the different employers in London to all different drivers in London. And how can we connect these? And then slowly kind of backfilling with technology where we're sort of realizing, okay, well, this is how we need to do this. And we had this quite kind of like, I would say, clever view that essentially you can have a driver that needs to go to 3 spots. And so you can then route them to the 3 spots. And that like adds a lot of value to everybody because like
Nice.
a driver's earning more and the people get their food quicker and things like that. So, we're starting to figure these things out ourselves just over the phone, like figuring stuff out in Google Maps, and then we can just build that into the platform straight away. And that's how we start to sort of build the tech around that. So,
That's amazing. I love that. With such a It's such a great journey, and I think I mean, I said this before, but I think I love hearing that journey from coming out of school to that place where you're already third time around, you're doing it quick, you're setting it up, you're getting it running, and you're also just validating for yourself that you caught on to something much, much faster,
wicked.
by that third time, and it's such a great way to approach it, and so many good learnings in that period.
Big time. Big
I
time.
love that. Now, where did like so what
Yeah.
was the spark from a workflow? And I have to know from a design perspective, workflow is just gorgeous. So like where when did the spark sort of happen for workflow and sort of what started that in motion?
So, I ended up selling the tech for that company. Um, and again, it actually wasn't that lucrative. It turns out the margins were pretty tight. And I went and then built another marketplace that then actually caught on and really, really worked out. And it was this on-demand staffing platform where you could book in waiters or nurses or like warehouse operators. So I'm running this company. We had 40 people in the team, and I am managing a really, really high performance product and engineering function in one area. And I'm also managing this quite chaotic marketing function in the other area. I loved our creators. We had some very talented creatives. It was
Yeah.
chaos.
Yeah. So yeah, been there.
Yeah, and that's the way it is, unfortunately. So I mean, it was just frustrating to me that where this chaos was coming from, because I don't actually think it was because of the people. We had really, really good people. And I just started like looking over almost like enviously at how our engineering team was able to operate and all the tech they had available. So to kind of break that down, our engineering team had centralized review in GitHub. That is like the de facto way you now review code. You wouldn't
Yep.
dream like doing what they did 50 years ago, where they like you'd zip up the code base and just email it to someone.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And then
Right.
I'll unpack it and then I'll compile it and then I'll
Yeah,
talk to you about it.
exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
That happened, and then it moved to this, like, technology called FTP, which is basically like picture Dropbox for code,
Hmm.
and it's like one person can, check it out like a library card. They can check out the code, and everyone else is locked. It was still not super efficient, and then it moved to centralized review.
Oh, you know what that I just had this flashback of Dreamweaver did
Yeah,
that
yeah,
back in the day.
totally.
I remember on
Yeah,
Dreamweaver being able to like work on a website and like check out those files, from a web design and development perspective. Or what all of a sudden I get flashbacks of like Corel Draw and like
yeah,
Dreamweaver and stuff. But that's so great. So this is essentially it's dog food, right? You're
yeah,
dog fooding the fact that you built a company, and as you were built a company, you looked at which was very Slack, right, in their pivot, but like you saw a problem and you solved it for yourself, and then took that into your next iteration.
exactly that, exactly that. How do we solve this very messy process of, managing all of these files that people just they just dump a file at you in Slack, and you lose it 3 days later, and you can't find it again, and the whole process is, like, quite chaotic. So, on the one hand, I had this like idea, maybe we could borrow some of the ideas from engineering, bring them over to the creative world. Part of that was centralized review. Part of that is automated testing. So in code, you now just set up a testing suite, checks the website's going to run smoothly. And it means as an engineer, you're not clicking on every link to test it works. Whereas in creative, it's so easy to like drop a full stop or you put a typo in somewhere and you just end up publishing it. You know,
Yep.
every single one of my LinkedIn posts has the shameful edited mark because I've put something.
I totally yeah, half my things have that edited because 'cause I'm like, "That looks great," and even the timer counts down,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
then it publishes, and right when it publishes, I go, "Oh, is it?"
Exactly.
Like, I've transposed 2 of those letters or whatever it is. I totally get it.
Exactly. So again, these ideas that like engineering is like decades ahead of how creative is running. So I'm inspired a little bit by this. And um actually approaching this, I started to get a little bit more disciplined about how I'd approach new ideas. So
Mm.
previously I'd just see, hey, here's some problem that I have. That was kind of where I started. I feel this pain. And
Yep,
then as I'm kind of moving through it through these businesses, I'm then going and speaking to customers. I'm saying, oh, here's a problem that I think you have, and I'm going to just tell you the solution, and you can just tell me if you'd pay for that and use that. But then at this stage, there's this kind of like next level of discovery where you say, you know what? I don't even know what the problem is. Forget the solution. I don't even know what their problem is. And
yep,
that's a really, really strange place to start. But what it means is you're just picking a niche. You're picking a group of users who have some common behavior, and you're then just going to go and listen and learn. And so what I did is I then, when I was sort of exploring this idea of like the chaotic world of sending files around and managing your creative work, is I spoke to I think 30 different agency owners, and I reached out to anybody I knew, which wasn't very many, maybe 3 or 4. And then I went on Upwork. I posted job ads saying like, would everyone like want to speak to me? I'll pay whatever your hourly rate is. And I was emailing people, I'll pay your hourly rate. And like
yep,
most people don't take you up on that because they just want to know you're respecting their time.
right.
So I sit down, I'm listening. I'm like, hey, take me through what's going on. Like, where are you frustrated? What does your day look like? And they're just starting to list out all these issues. And I'm getting like a map of like how everybody's working. And the reason you do that is you then know what's the number one issue on their plate. It's so easy as an entrepreneur to pick out something that is genuinely a pain point. It just happens to be pain point number like 256,
Right.
which they kind of don't have time to go solve or the money or the budget to go solve. if you come in and you just listen to the problems of a particular niche and what's number one in that area, you know this is like the thing that bugs them the most and they will definitely pay for.
Right.
And the thing that came out from like creative agency owners is like getting feedback really hurts. And like
Yep.
managing the process of collaborating really, really hurts. And so, I mean, just sort of like to recap, I've come from this pain I felt myself. I've then discovered that there's actually bigger problem around creative collaboration and feedback that could be figured out. And so, hearing those problems, I then went and built a deck that just said, here are the three problems I think I've heard. Here is the three things I think you want a solution. Went back to the same people. Is this correct? Which one of these problems is actually the most important? Oh, it's this one. Great. Are these is this solution set useful? What other attributes would you need of this solution to make it work? And that basically mapped out our initial feature set for this new company. And it was super validated. And I knew I already had like 30 customers basically lined up, good to go when we built it. So
Nice.
that is, I would say, like the best way you can go about like getting yourself started.
That's amazing. Now, what was the time frame there when you were? So was this were you still um, at the previous like and had you sort of started exploring this, or was this post acquisition or post sale? Then you started exploring this.
Yeah. So this was actually post sale.
Mm.
And I had been exploring like a different problem, which was around how people talk to each other over meetings. And I felt like Zoom meetings are a nightmare to be able to like collaborate with people on. And
Yeah.
so I was exploring like, what if we had something which allowed people to have a Zoom meeting, but it's kind of also a part of the apps that you were using. So I was exploring
Yep.
that, realized that like the technology to build that was going to be really, really difficult. So then I just started like expanding to other ideas. And so I'm kind of
Yeah.
at this point in my life, I have a bit more funds behind me and I have the time to be able to like go and do this properly. And so the time frame for that validation period, I think the first round of conversations took maybe 4 to 6 weeks. And then
Hmm.
round of conversations where I'm like really dialing in exactly what we need is like maybe another 4 weeks.
Nice.
Something.
And what was like? I'm so curious. As a no, I have an affliction. I have a problem. The problem is that I try every physical and digital product that I can get my hands on. And so on the physical side, I buy everything, I try it, and then I sell it on Mercari or on Facebook Marketplace, because I just want to know how it works. I want to know the just tactically the UI, the UX, the experience of as I sort of narrow down some of my favorite things, and then digitally I do the same thing. I see this like I was super early on like Loom, you know what I mean? Like, as soon as these things
Mhm.
come out, like, I'm, like, trying it when it's rough and I'm giving prototype feedback, like, and I just love sort of seeing the evolution of some of these sort of things, and so, obviously, in my era, I've tried, like, the markups and
Mm.
and Miro and obviously Figma, and I think about, like, Frame.io, and I think about all these sort of, adjacent kind of services. But what I'm super interested in is that it seems like one of the things that you didn't do or haven't done yet is niche down into a specific, like this is for flat file creative feedback, or this is for video and you're going to go after frame.io, or this is for website feedback. So you're going to go after a markup or whoever else is in that space. Like what was it that sort of has kept you in this, like, no, my circle is sort of wider and I eat all of those things because my solution sort of, does that. What was was that a conscious decision, or did you find yourself just sort of not constricting past a certain point?
Yeah, it's definitely been customer led. So to give some context to people listening, the software company I run, Workflow, basically allows you to add any asset or creative piece of work you're working on, like a website, for example, and then share a link to that to any collaborator you're working on, and they can come and put comments on it and do video feedback on it and this kind of thing. And we've had this kind of question of like, should we just do one asset type really, really well? Um, for example, Frame.io do video really well. The reality is that like most designers these days are using more and more different mediums together. And
Yep.
marketing and creative teams are doing that as well to be able to like launch a message, but through like videos on TikTok. And also they're doing some print ads. And then they're also,
Totally. Oh, I can tell you a use case here, which is super relevant, which will hopefully help explain it also is so for our social posts, we use Buffer, right? So Buffer, basically, we go in and we sort of schedule those. And my social media manager, Carmela, she goes in and posts them, and then she adds some comments. So I have a Buffer login with a Buffer account for myself that has comments tied to it that I need to go answer. Then that usually comes into Slack and she says, "Hey, I built out a bunch of social media posts. They are now in Buffer. Can you go review them?" So that is one sort of like thing I need to go do. Then we've got our UI UX designers that are working in Figma, and they're building out new pages for the platform and for the marketing site. And then they go into Figma and they comment and they say, "Hey, can you review these things and let me know what you think?" So, and then that usually comes back to Slack where I then I get a message that says, "Hey, can you go into Figma and review these things?" So now I have Buffer on one side and I have Figma on the other side. Then from a video perspective, I'm shooting and at video myself. We're getting testimonials in, and I'm taking that and I'm putting it in frame.io. And Frame basically, I add that, or Carmela adds social memes or whatever it is that she adds. And she says to me in Frame in comments, "Hey, can you review this stuff and let me know what you think?" And then that usually goes into Slack where it's like, "Hey, I put some stuff in a Frame. Can you go review the stuff that's in Frame?" So this is just three things between website or product development and social media and video, and it's just those three. But even thinking about print creative or copywriting for blogs, a blog would be another example. We do it in Google Drive. So then somebody does it in Google Drive, and then they take that and they comment. That is three or four, and
yes,
obviously bigger companies have way more than this, but these are three or four disparate platforms that all have comments that are not tied to each other, that all have different accounts that are not tied to
yep,
each other. And so me as the stakeholder, I have to keep up with how many people are commenting to me on how many tasks on how many platforms that
yep,
I have to sort of, so the overhead even for me as a single person is a lot to just sit down for a second and go, how many comments across how many platforms do I need to review and
yep.
give feedback on? To which we will either close all of those out in individual platforms or we won't. And I will need to come back to those platforms again before
Yep.
those are reviewed and approved.
Yeah, we've honestly been inundated with these like single purpose tools from Silicon Valley.
Yep.
And that's kind of the playbook. Like you choose one very specific thing and then you give the user a bit of like incremental value in that one area. But the kind of cost we're now seeing is we're using so many different tools. I mean, even for just like one asset, like one design asset, forget across different mediums, that might go from an idea that you had in a Zoom call that got shared on Slack. Now it's in a task manager, and then you have to go and build it in Figma, and then you end up sharing that in Slack again. You have all these different places where you have
And
these
the
different.
knowledge for the teams that are using these, I was in a team that was heavily using Miro and heavily using Figma. I was like, can we just use FigJam? Like, can we just at least consolidate one sort of, but how easy it gets once you get everybody in one
Yep.
ecosystem and one, platform to be able to do these things saves not only yourself, but saves so many hours across the whole organization.
Yeah. I mean, that is exactly it. And I think one company does this really well is you look at like the Apple ecosystem and you just know that everything speaks to each other and you
Yep.
know that it's a very simple experience to work in that space. And so something I'm kind of inspired by is what if we can bring all of these different creative assets that people are doing and these different conversations they're having into one space so it can kind of be organized and kept in a way that's not a huge overhead to everybody. And they're not
Yeah.
constantly switching and distracted by notifications and 6 inboxes and things. So that's kind of where we've been led on this, and that's been a strongly customer-led, desire. You know, people have just said to us, like, "We are stressed,"
Yeah.
right?
Totally. And I think even sometimes I think we're trying to do the same thing too from a Sackless perspective. Is not, it's very easy for us to sort of we've gotten do you just niche down, right? Is this just for travel and restaurants or whatever? But you see, even on a global macro on a macro scale, that we have the same problems in in our personal and professional lives. Name the amount of apps and platforms you use, and then name the amount of places you save and try and remember stuff on all of those
Yeah.
things. So for
True.
me, having another platform like a Belly to review restaurants, that's one more app that I need to like invite my wife to, and I've got to make sure I only put or I only save stuff in there, and I don't do it also on Google Maps or OpenTable or Talk or Resi. Like, it just keeps going and going and going.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, I think it's so interesting that I think you're gonna have more and more of this where it's like we had this niche down sort of principle, because it was super easy to like identify a problem or an opportunity area, put money towards it, grow a team, make some revenue. This is something that we can grow. But that's just going to get to a point where no one's going to want to have to manage 200 services and platforms across their lives. Like, it's going to
Totally.
have to come down into something that all works together.
Totally. I think people are getting that app fatigue. And additionally, something I'm very inspired by is you see people starting to get really intentional about the platforms that they add into their either their own life or their team's life. So there's one
Right.
agency that I spoke to who took the very extreme view that they were not going to have any chat. They're not going to be distracted by chat throughout the day. Now, I don't think many organizations could do that, but I think them taking that view was this stance of like, we're going to control the narrative and the conversation around this so that we're not distracted from the work that we're doing. We're going to have some set times when we catch up, when that's going to allow us to do really good quality, deep work. And so for
Yeah.
that agency, I think that's like a brilliant bit of kind of orchestration of the environment to allow you to do really good quality work.
Yeah.
Um, and there's
And I
like,
think AI is gonna help a lot with that. I think orchestration is the perfect word for it. Like, we've tried to do it on Slack where you've got these apps that sort of tell people that you're in focus mode or whatever it is, but I think a lot of that stuff's gonna start happening automatically where your system can sort of tell that you're, like, into something, and it's something that was also on your to-do list that you've been putting off for a little bit, like, and so because of that, it's just gonna sort of, like, block things out, and then when you come back to life, then it's gonna go, "Hey, I got 4 things. You need to do these. You need to talk to Sue. You
yes,
need to email this thing, whatever, and it's gonna get better, but until that takes place, I can totally see how doing that sort of manual curation of platforms and services to try and, like, to help relieve that overwhelm and stress.
totally. Have you seen Design Joy?
No.
So it's this one man design subscription agency who is cranking some huge numbers, like $145,000 a month kind of thing. And he has this policy that he doesn't take meetings with clients. And, I think every agency owner is like, that doesn't make sense. That's not going to work. But he has put in place those constraints and built a business around it.
Yeah.
And that's actually worked for him. And I think there's just this like beauty in like adding in these constraints that yes, you lose on this marginal gain of, yeah, maybe you could have took a meeting and maybe got one extra client, but
Right.
at what cost to, the rest of your
Totally. I love that. And I
uh,
also love that when it's like most people would go, "That would never work. You're gonna have to build relationships. You're gonna have to like XYZ." And then you get someone on the other side going, nope, you don't." That's my favorite. I love those sort of things.
yeah.
Um,
No, I'm
where did the
fascinated.
design portion of this become? Because it's so elegant. It's like, I mean, I wouldn't have said physics. I would have said you were in architecture. Like, where did the simplicity and the design, especially on the UI, come from?
So again, there's a part of this that is very consumer led. I spoke to people, they said they hated cluttered apps. ClickUp requires a PhD, is one of the phrases that someone said. But there's
Yeah.
also a part of that that's just me. And, I'm a bit weird. I, when I hear the radio turn on to ads, that has to go down. Like I can't have that extra noise in
Yeah.
my head. Um, when you finish like watching a movie on like Amazon Prime, it comes up with a little pop-up for the next movie. Totally understand they want to get you on the next thing. I hate that. I actually built a
Yeah,
Chrome extension that goes and finds the CSS and hides that.
that's
So
amazing. I love that.
so I really, really appreciate clarity and like space to think. And even like small little distractions can really throw me off. And so kind of like reflecting that in the products. One of the things that I really wanted from this space is it's something where the creative work is front and center, like it takes up the maximum amount of space we can possibly give it, and nothing else is going to get in the way of that piece of creative work. And so little things that I think a lot of designers will pick up on, but I don't think a lot of other users will pick up on. It's things like if you have color in a UI and the color of like some green button is a slightly different color to something that's green on the design, suddenly your brain is just processing a clash of these colors instead of taking in the design. And so I kind of like had this um, obsession with stripping out everything that was going to get in the way of that piece of creative work. And that meant reduced colors, that meant taking out a lot of functionality. It meant revisiting a bunch of design norms, which I think people take for granted. For example, normally you want every screen to kind of present all the options it can do at any time. And so it kind of ends up a cockpit of buttons. But for me, I actually want these screens to be a presentation of the information first and to give you functionality second, a distant second. And so things that only appear on hover or bits of functionality that you have to have a keyboard shortcut to go and access. And you train the user to do that. For example, to do search, you just pull up the command bar. Most designers know how to do that, and we do have that part of onboarding. But it means we don't have a little search icon in the top right, which every other platform would have. So we've really like stripped back everything we can so that there's just the minimum amount on the screen. And for me, it just makes it a space where you can focus on the work, and that's really what it's all about.
I love it. And it's I tell you another thing that it does though is from a brand and trust perspective that because you've hit all of those, it's so elegant and clean that it also subconsciously, I think it from the homepage to when you log in to when you're using it is you just get that this is it looks I don't know when you started, but it looks way more mature than I assumed that you know what I mean? That
Yeah.
it's one of those things that like it looks like it's been iterated upon a lot. And so it looks really nice. But I will say is, kudos to you and the team because that simplicity and that removing doesn't always work. I'll give you a good
Yeah,
example is I don't know if you've ever heard of Dovetail.
I
Like
haven't.
it's a platform where you can, let's say you and I were doing a Zoom video or like this, and I said, I want you to give me product feedback, and we were recording this. I can take that product feedback and put it into Dovetail, and then
Nice.
they sort of automated. They get transcripts, and then they automate over it, and so you can start to highlight. This person says that's confusing, or this person says that's confusing, or whatever it is. And so it's where you can sort of aggregate all of that user feedback. I have tried my hardest to like this platform, and they did a very similar thing where it's very, very clean. Like, it's
Mm.
supposed to be very sort of straightforward, but it's one of those that I have spent at least 3 concerted 30-minute, like, sessions just sitting down, sort of trying to, like, get in the flow and just cannot. And there's something about, like, they have projects and insights and data. Okay, so I make a project and let's call it homepage feedback. Well, then I upload, it says, do you want to make a new insight? And I'm like, I don't know, do I? And then data is is that the output of what I get? Well, it turns out you have to upload a video and that's called data. And like
Ah,
there's this like very specific sort of flow, but it feels like it's one of those that you have to kind of, if you know, you know.
yeah.
And I spent like a good effort amount of time sort of doing it. And then I gave them that feedback, and their feedback was like, oh, well, here's how you're supposed to sort of, do it. And I think that's one
Wrong
of those things that
thing.
like after, and this was recently, which is why I also love digging into workflows because I've been through some of those platforms where it has tried to be very clean and sort of minimal, but you also you either take it too far or the labeling and other things are not right, and it doesn't become sort of intuitive. What I would say from a workflow perspective is and working with lots of different creative and management teams in the past is that you've done a great job of being able to make it clean and simple, but also not so stripped down that you have to like be an insider, or you've got to be really designy to kind of learn how to use it. It's simple in the notion sort of way, in that it's simple, but it's also like super powerful once you get into it. So kudos, because that's a hard thing that you typically assume that someone in a later stage company has kind of figured out through trial and error and lots of like negative feedback, but it feels like you guys have sort of solved that out of the gate.
That's really, really appreciated, Carl. And to be honest, it has been a lot of hours, a lot of reps, which is to say, we reach out to everybody that joins the platform and try to get on a call and watch them use it. And we really listen to where people are getting stuck. And so there's a huge amount of, yes, there's the sort of artistic stripping away where you can bring your sort of craft and taste to it as a designer to be able to make it simple. There's also a lot of just sitting and watching people get stuck, the struggle, and then give them just a little bit more information and like try and find that right balance. I think where you get trapped as a designer is if you lean entirely onto your own taste, you're flying blind because you haven't actually watched enough users using the platform. So I think that's like a big factor into it. And yeah, kudos to the team who have done a huge amount of that as well. Um, Another thing I would say that's really helped us with this is because we're trying to build this kind of inclusive space where everyone can chip in on design, you know, it can't be something that is really oriented around power users. And I think like if you're building Figma, you know that your users are fairly tech savvy and they're kind of gonna know what these icons mean and so on. And we're working in this environment where actually you might be sharing this link to a design with somebody who is like some senior stakeholder who can't like zoom in. you
And
know?
some of it is generational also. I also think it's one of
Also,
those that, like, being someone born in '79, I always sort of consider myself in that, like, Nintendo generation, and you get this, like, the people that sort of grew up with Nintendo and Sega and, like, Game Boy and, like, you know what I mean, and the early computers and stuff like that. There's this way of thinking and interacting with computers that just sort of a bit older than that, it's not as intuitive to think in these
totally.
sort of systems and patterns. You have to sort of be conscious to train yourself to do that. So I
Totally.
agree. It's that's super important, that being able to send something to someone and have it be as intuitive as Gmail or whatever that someone is used to using is important.
Exactly. We had this phrase, which I don't like, but one of our customers came up with, which is dinosaur users who not only are they not tech savvy, they don't want to become tech savvy. they just want to get
Yeah, yeah,
techie.
yeah. No, it's
And
very specific. It's not even just sort of, I don't have the time, but I've also decided that this is not something that I'm gonna like
no,
push
yeah,
or train myself on. So
try and train
that's a
them.
hard sort of nut to crack from a UI UX perspective.
It is. It's a hard use to build for. But these people are busy, important people often, and you want to respect them and their time. And I don't think these are idiots. They just want something that just works. It's very simple. And so really have this like mandate of like, how do you build a product that works for those people? Really forces you to make a whole bunch of decisions. There's a whole bunch of stuff that you just can't do when you're thinking about that person. For example, as soon as you build cluster into the UI, it's game over. They shut the laptop. It's like, I can't use this, get somebody else. So you
Yep.
suddenly make really, really difficult decisions to be able to like keep them in the game. And I think that like actually helps everybody else because then everybody else kind of gets the benefit of something that like has to be quite simple. Um,
Totally.
yeah.
What's so where do you go? So you've raised a seed. What's the looking forward? What are you looking forward to? And what's the sort of, we're days away from a new year. What are you looking forward to in this next year?
Yeah. So we're building this platform that is kind of, as you say, appealing to all these different types of creatives. And I think I still think we're very, very early. At this stage, we are building kind of this space, this place where you can build out your workflow. your environment for collaborating on creative work. And it's kind of building the building blocks for people to have that space. I think what happens this year is we go from something that's very focused on our platform and the fundamentals of can you upload things, can you add comments, to specific use cases for different types of user, and where we're starting to go more into the user's world and give people really quick access to this exact kind of use case they need. Okay, that sounds very theoretical. Let me give you a really concrete example of a company that has
Yep.
nailed it. So like Notion started out as being this like software builder where you can build whatever platform you like. And then they realized that users didn't want to build software. What users want is they want a to-do list, or they want a Kanban board, or they want
Right.
docs page for their company. And there's like these specific outcomes. And so we've kind of built the building blocks of making a workflow where you can share your work and you can collaborate. But I think for us next, it's like, how do we make that super, super accessible for creatives? Instead of you having to set it up, it just comes out of the box with a whole bunch of sensible defaults so that it's like ready to go.
Yeah, if I could pick a box folder or a Dropbox folder or a Google Drive folder and anything that was uploaded to that just all of a sudden became, an action and a thing for me to review that I
That's
wouldn't have to, it's one less link that I would have to like go into. I would just end up seeing my inbox,
yes.
and I click it. And to that point about the dinosaur user, that user doesn't have to sort of go into what folder is it? Did you put it in the new folder or the other folder?
Yeah.
Log in and click your inbox and like, I want you to watch this thing, and then I want you to type your comments, or whatever it is. I could
Yeah.
see that like being super powerful.
That you nail on the head there, which is like, how do you, instead of having somebody come to our platform and think, how do I set this up?
Yeah.
Then instead going to them where they're already working in places like Dropbox.
We'll
And
have
so,
the platform go out, connect, and
yeah,
bring it all back into the
exactly.
simplicity that you've created is that's super powerful.
So some of the things we're playing with in that space are, a lot of creative work is shared in this very casual way through like a screen grab. Like you won't export a frame from Figma necessarily and send that in
Yeah.
Slack. You might share the whole thing, but if you want like a specific part of it, you might just screen grab that and just put that in Slack. So we're kind of exploring, can we allow people to like capture parts of their screen and then share that, but it's actually not just a static PNG. It's a place where they can then like add comments and video review and so on. And so all of that's kind of in this theme of how can the platform go to where people are working and like the habits they have for sharing work,
That's cool.
and then get to
I
work.
also like my brain starts racing to like I could see this little Mac app that runs up by your clock, and it basically is if you drag and drop something up there,
Yes.
it's just a dropping. But then it
Yep.
also you could have a screenshot alternative that when you do the screenshot alternative, it gives you that like even in Mac it does the preview where you can mark it up and stuff like that. But if you've got your own, then it basically means it is so interfaceless, that
Yes.
you don't really sort of see it. But what it does is even if you're not the most power user, you can still get it from yourself to the power user, like with no like, what was the site? And I can't remember my login. I don't have the piece of paper, like whatever it is. Like it's just,
Crazy.
sort of that could be a cool way to do it.
I love that, man,
Uh,
and, it reminds me of, like, Loom, where it's just a habit, like, no one's thinking, "I'm opening Loom." You're already recording a Loom before you've even thought it.
Totally. Yeah, yeah, yeah. You don't even think of it as an app as much as it's just this little widget, but the power in that widget is amazing. So yeah, I dig that. What else in terms of so I could see so that to me sort of is the platform stretching beyond the website, right? Into sort of
Yes,
APIs and connectors and little microservices and things like that.
exactly.
Um,
Yeah.
what about like from a team perspective or culture or like what's the plan for next year?
Yeah, so we have just grown from 3 people, I think we were about 9 months ago, to 12. We're all based out of this office in the center of London, a little creative studio, and we've decided that we wanna keep the team, small but high talent density. The idea being we're going to pay people a bit more than you'd usually pay people, but
Yep.
get like people available. And by having fewer people, there's less communication overhead.
Yep.
And the theory is that this will help us move faster. I also think it's just like a really fun way to work because you're not thinking about management layers and things. It's just
Oh,
it's
if you could just stave that off as long as possible, like, our Slack is but just a bunch of GIFs, like, basically, like, Martina, our CTO, ships something, it goes to production, or sends, like, something for testing, and I click on it, I look at it, and all I do is send back that GIF emoji of the ship going, and
yeah, yeah,
and she just knows that means ship it and, like, and pushes it out into production, and we're just like but having fun like that without all of the sort of, layers is I've heard 30 is, like, one of
mm,
these, sort of when you hit that thing, it
yeah, yeah, yeah.
totally flips into that next realm of, communication breakdown and hierarchy and why wasn't I included and, like, and all that sort of stuff, so
Yeah,
you're
yeah,
in a
yeah.
good sweet spot.
Yeah, we're gonna try and keep it in the sweet spot, as you say. I love that bit where like everyone kind of knows each other. It's kind of feels more like a WhatsApp group than a company, you know?
Yeah,
It's just
totally.
everyone knows.
And the
If everyone's
shorthand is so efficient. Someone sends over a
smart,
quick screenshot and you write back, "Yep,
done.
I know all of the things that are gonna happen because we're" you know what I mean? We're all just mind melded together, in such a way that and everyone's making very similar calls, like, we're all sort of tapped into the same, the same brain waves, and it's a special period. We'll
Yeah, it's
call it
cool.
under 30.
Yeah, yeah, the under 30, the teens. Yeah, so I'm looking forward to the next couple of months while we're sticking in this period. And the goal for us is to kind of turn this into a company. We're doing something that's a bit un-VC, which is we're really, really caring about building a profitable, stable company rather than
Yep.
blowing it up massively. So for us, it's just about getting the basics right and building really great. You talk about like culture. What is our culture of building a great quality product? Like, how do
Yep.
we infuse that into everything we do and take the time to get it right? I mean, these things, it's not even something you can hire for. Sometimes it's also something you just have to like build a community around these principles. And so that's kind of where we're up to. And it's a thing I'm
Yeah.
thinking a lot about, you know. I actually bring like products and things into the office for us to talk about. And we just think about like what made this great. I've got one that I got for Christmas, which is there's this really fancy brand of cookware, the Cuirassier, which is
Yes.
and, just, like, maybe bringing that into the office, and we can talk about what the experience is like there. I just feel like all of that team building stuff, it sounds goofy, but honestly, that's the magic that makes a team really, really
Yeah,
good on the same wavelength.
totally.
So,
Amazing. Well, I can't wait to
mm,
I so appreciate you. Like this is so fun. Just having these conversations and it gets me all like I'm all juiced for next week when we start getting back into things um I really love hearing the early stories and what I would love to do is if you're up for it is maybe late 2025 is Q3 Q4 come back and I'd love to hear where you guys are at and what you're working on and do a bit of a follow up on this one.
I would absolutely love that. That'd be great.
Yeah. Dig it. Well, this was so great. I appreciate it, and I'm so glad that we I got the email. I signed up for the wait list. I got on the wait list, and then I think you and I emailed. We got on the phone, and I think within the first minute or two, I'm like, "Don't tell me anything about the platform. You go. We got to do it on the podcast. This is so great." You know what I mean? So I'm so glad that we got the chance to do it. So hang out here after we finish, and we'll catch up a little bit.
That sounds great, man. Really, really good to catch up.
Yeah, good to see you.